Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV, and today we're going to go ahead and do our live show where we're going to break down some of the most important and interesting cases that happen in the world of policing from the last couple weeks. And again, I want to welcome everyone in, and real curious to see where everybody is watching from. Looks like we have Abe from Central Virginia. We have Kuros from Phoenix, Arizona. Love the show. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Bully is from the Netherlands. It is good to have you in. And listen, while we're going through some of these really interesting, important, and controversial police stories, definitely feel free to put your comments, thoughts, or opinions in the chat, because one of my favorite things to do is to go back and forth and really have a dialogue and discussion. And especially in this first case, Chasing Legends from Albuquerque. What a coincidence. Welcome in, Chasing Legends. Washington State, good to see you. Because hey, Cajun Randy, good to see you from Louisiana. One of the most important things that we like is that, so we do have a case, especially this first case that I'm going to go over. It's a real controversial case, and there are 3 or 4 legitimate questions that even if you aren't anti-police, if you're just a regular person out there watching this officer-involved shooting, you're going to have some legitimate questions about this. And I've really thought about these questions. I'm going to go ahead and answer them. And definitely, if you have any others, go ahead and put it in the chat. Oh, thank you so much for the comment. Keep up the great work, brother. You've got the best channel on YouTube. We have a great staff here who finds really the most raw and interesting interactions between police officers and citizens. Really just getting in there and just showing the people, hey, this is what police officers deal with on a daily basis. Yeah, thank you so much. We do have a great channel here, and our staff here works really hard to make it so. All right, and again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me just about everywhere over at Police Law News. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Make sure you share it with friends and families. One of the things we like to do is to get as many people in these live shows as possible. So definitely go ahead and share the channel. One of the things that I did just before this, there's a show on the OAN network. An anchor named Chris Boyle does a show called Nights with Chris Boyle, and I actually just appeared on a segment. It was about a 15-minute segment, and I think that's going to air tonight. So you can find them on Instagram, pretty much anywhere. OAN, Chris Boyle, Nights with Chris Boyle. I'll be on a segment there tonight. If you want to go ahead and check that out, I appreciate the support. All right, listen, we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. So this first case that we're going to talk about happened in Chicago on March 21st, 2024, and like I've said before, Chicago is where I'm from. I grew up in Chicago. I lived there until I was 22 years old, until I got a police job and moved 1,300 miles away. But I grew up in Chicago, so I know a whole lot about Chicago. And listen, even living there for 22 years, there are a whole bunch of neighborhoods that I never set foot in. My mom is in her 70s. She's lived in Chicago her entire life. That in 70-something years, she's never set foot in these neighborhoods. And this first officer-involved shooting that we're going to talk about happened in one of those neighborhoods that virtually, except my friends who stayed back home and are Chicago cops, literally no one I know goes into neighborhoods like this because they're incredibly dangerous. All right, so the first case we're going to go into involved an individual named Dexter Reed. And listen, this case has been pretty controversial. It's made national news. It's pretty much been everywhere. There's been protests in Chicago over this case. And let me explain what happened in this case. Then I'm going to go into some of the controversial issues that are involved in this case. And then I'm going to give some of my opinions about whether or not I think not only if the officer-involved shooting was legal, but if the police officer did anything wrong when it comes to tactics or how they dealt with this individual. So this happened on March 21st, 2024, and there was basically officers that were part of a tactical team. Now, the way that they were essentially dressed in plain clothes, but they had vests on that said police in really big letters across the front and the back. So if they were out of their cars, you could absolutely see that they were police officers because of the vest that said police. Also, they had on radios and body cams and handcuffs and handguns and other things and a badge, other things that would indicate that they are police officers. But essentially, police officers initiated a traffic stop an individual named Dexter Reed. He's 26 years old. And the official reason given for the traffic stop was a seatbelt violation. So that's the reasonable suspicion. And if you actually watch the body camera video and you slow it down to a freeze frame like I did, because that's how I act sometimes, you can clearly see that Dexter Reed did not have his seatbelt on. So the reasonable suspicion for the traffic stop, yes. Now we can all say, hey, this shouldn't be a law, or police officers shouldn't enforce this law. That's fine. We can have those discussions. I like having those discussions. But in reality, Dexter Reed was committing a traffic violation, and that was the official reason that police officers stopped him. So they stopped Dexter Reed, and they approached the car pretty much with their guns out. This wasn't like a normal traffic stop. Yes, Rodney Kitley. A reasonable suspicion of a crime. Yeah, so not reasonable suspicion like, hey, I think you're a suspicious person because you're walking around. No, it's reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or will be committed. Yeah, so reasonable suspicion. That's the official phrasing of it. So police officers do a traffic stop where they basically have their guns drawn. It's not like me walking up to a car where I used to work, being like, "Hey, I'm Officer Smith with the police department. Can I see your driver's license and registration?" No, police officers get out of the car. They have their guns drawn. They approach the front and the passenger side, and they immediately start giving the driver, Dexter Reed, commands. They're giving him a couple commands. One is to roll down the window because he starts rolling up the window as the police officers approach. The other command that they're giving to Mr. Reed is to have him exit the vehicle. So instead of doing those things, Mr. Reed does literally the opposite. He doesn't exit the vehicle. He starts to roll up his window, and then he shoots a police officer that's on the passenger side. The police officer is shot in the arm, and kind of like in the wrist area, and the officer from the body camera footage, starts basically to retreat and to walk away. He says, I'm shot, pretty much as soon as that happens. Now, you can imagine what happens when Dexter Reed shoots a police officer. Can anybody guess? Put in the chat, what do you think the response from police officers were? Well, that's exactly what it was. They fired a shit ton at Dexter Reed because, again, police officers can only utilize deadly force if there is a deadly threat presented. Well, if you're shooting, it's not, hey, there's a gun and he's reaching for it, or the gun is in the holster, or he's holding the gun and he's kind of waving it around. No, I mean, we are past code red here. He has already shot a police officer. So police officers, there were 4 different police, and I should say that Dexter Reed didn't just fire 1 round, he fired 11 rounds at police officers. Thankfully, only 1 police officer was hit 1 time, and the officer will make a full recovery. But police officers then did fire 96 times. 4 different officers fired 96 times, which isn't that unreasonable, but we'll get into that here in a minute. But police officers fired 96 times. Obviously, Mr. Reed did not survive that officer-involved shooting, whereas, again, you shoot a police officer at point-blank range. My guess is no reasonable person would say, yeah, that's a situation that I think this guy's going to make it out of. I mean, again, this is a situation where it's almost like officer-induced. This is like suicide by cop. I mean, because, again, there's no other way for this to go. So people have a lot of different questions about this, and I'm going to go ahead and answer some of those questions. I think Kuros actually has one of those questions. So let's see. Kuros says, it's not clear when all the other officers showed up. Did they run his plate and determine that it was a high-risk stop? God, Kuros, that's such a good question. That's exactly where I'm going to go. So in my opinion, and again, they haven't specifically said this, but this is my opinion, and I could be wrong. So the tactical unit or the police officers that initiated this traffic stop weren't uniformed police officers in a marked police car driving around, and they see a seatbelt violation, they do a regular traffic stop. That's obviously not what happened here. But they also weren't undercover officers. I went back and forth on social media pretty much the last week or so with people who were claiming that these officers were undercover officers. They weren't undercover officers, and here's why. Because undercover police officers are actually undercover. It's essentially, undercover officers, they are embedded in some type of a group or a gang, or they are pretending to be someone else. Undercover officers do not conduct traffic stops because that would essentially blow their cover. Here's an example. An undercover police officer, most of the time, you're never going to know they're a cop. An undercover police officer will do the drug buy, right? They'll do the drug buy, they'll leave, they'll walk away, and they'll send these guys in to make the arrest. So there's a huge difference between what these officers were and undercover. Again, these guys were not undercover, but they were in unmarked cars, mostly in plain clothes, except for the vest. But if you're driving around in a car, you can't necessarily see the vest, so it looks like a regular car. It looks like just a dude driving a car, and especially from a distance, like most of the time you can't tell that they're police officers, which is the point. Now, these undercover tactical units, this isn't something new. They've actually been doing this for a really long time, and I know that for a couple reasons. Again, not just because I grew up in Chicago and I lived in Chicago, but during my freshman year of college, in my area where I grew up in Chicago, most of the people in my area were cops, firefighters, electricians, teachers, normal people, but I knew a lot of my friends' dads were Chicago Chicago cops growing up. And, one of them, basically I was a freshman year doing a degree in criminal justice. And, I asked my friend if there was my friend's dad, if there's any way I could do a ride along. And, he said no. And then about 6 months later, he said, you know what, I think I can. And he actually had me do a ride along with these undercover tactical units. So, I wasn't in a marked police car. I was in one of these cars that, doesn't have any markings on them. And the officers that I was riding along with, they were in plain clothes, but they had these vests on. So that was in 2002. So, and my guess is this wasn't when I did a ride along in 2002. My guess is that wasn't the first day that they decided to do this. So, 25, 30, who knows how long they've been doing this. But the reason I'm saying that is because there's a lot of people going back on social media saying that these cops were out of uniform and they were violating some policy. Well, again, that's uneducated and ridiculous to say, because these types of street tactical units in Chicago have been doing it for well over 20 years. So, when it comes to the traffic stop, to answer Kuros, my guess is these type of officers, listen, they are not stopping cars just for seatbelt violations. That's not really what they want. They're not looking to write traffic tickets. What they are looking to do is they're looking to take guns and violent people off the street. That's literally what their job is to find guns, drugs, and take violent people off the street. That's what they're looking to do. So, and again, there's no proof of this, but here's my guess. If you want to ask me like, well, what do I think they were doing? Because here's the thing. My guess is a tactical unit like this, they're not stopping random cars for a seatbelt violation, getting out with their guns drawn and demanding people to step out of the car. Like that's not a thing that likely happened. So here's my guess. And I have to go into a little bit about who Dexter Reed is. And essentially, Dexter Reed is a guy who back in 2023, so not that long ago, he was charged with a crime, and the crime was 3 counts of aggravated unlawful carrying of a weapon. And he was actually on pretrial release for that, where he wasn't able to own a firearm or possess a firearm. His FOID card, that's the firearm owner's identification card in Illinois. It's essentially like a concealed carry card that you have to have in Chicago if you're going to carry a concealed weapon. So he was revoked on his ability to carry a concealed weapon. So here's my guess. I'm actually going to tell you this time. Here's my guess is that police officers had some intel, some information. Who knows who it was from? It was from a family member, if it was from a victim, if it was from a co-conspirator or someone trying to get out of their own criminal charges. My guess is the police officers had some kind of intel that, hey, this guy Dexter Reed, he's a convicted felon, he has a violent crime pending, this guy's carrying a fucking gun. He's carrying a gun. So again, that's my guess, is that they had that intel. So my guess is that they had that intel. They ran the background on him. They knew exactly who he was, and they had a real-time crime center do all kinds of checks on him. So they knew exactly who he was. They were following him around. Again, in these cars, they were following him around, and they finally found a time where he was in a car where they were going to initiate a traffic stop. They waited until they saw a legitimate traffic violation, the seatbelt, and then they initiated the traffic stop. So that's what I think happened. And, I'm sure there's going to be lawsuits about this case, and we'll be able to, confirm or deny if what I said is true. But again, with my experience on this, that's probably what happened. And, it's you have to look at it this way. Okay. So a lot of people are going to complain about, well, the police officer shouldn't be doing that. He's in violation of conditions of release and he has a gun, and, why are police officers even trying to do this? So I have a couple questions. One is, do you want police officers, Chicago is an incredibly, horribly violent city. Do you want police officers to actually go after people who are committing the violence? Yes or no? Okay, if the answer is no, well, then we don't have a whole lot to talk about. But the answer is yes. Okay, then let's walk down that path. So now, how do you want police officers to do it? Well, you don't like when police officers do no-knock warrants. And I get it. No-knock warrants are dangerous. So police officers, we don't want them to do no-knock warrants. But now we're saying you don't want them to do traffic stops either. So my question is, well then, how would you like police officers to take someone like Dexter Reed into custody? That's an honest question. Please go ahead and put it in the chat. Now, keep in mind, he's a convicted felon. He has a felony case pending. He is not allowed to possess a firearm, and the police officers know that he has a gun. It's not like it's a question. They know he has a gun. So how would you tactically, policy-wise, how would you like police officers to make an arrest in a situation like this? So again, a traffic stop, that isn't an unreasonable thing for police officers to do, because not only do you want to basically make it safe for Dexter, safe for the officers, but also safe for the community. You don't want to wait till Dexter gets out of his car at Walmart and starts walking in, and you're confronting him when you know he's armed, when there's 100 other civilians around. So doing a traffic stop when there's not a lot of people on the street, again, there's no ideal way to take violent criminals into custody. But again, a traffic stop isn't a bad idea. So just to expand on this a little further, let's say that Dexter had run from the traffic stop, like fled, didn't stop. Well, my guess is police officers aren't going to keep chasing him. They're not going to chase him. Again, we all don't like police pursuits either. So it's like once someone runs from a couple different traffic stops, it's like at that point, that's when they tried to go to the no-knock warrant. So, but luckily, this was the first step. That's what they did. So again, I don't think the reason, and so police officers, basically, like, their intent, like what the police officers actually want to do is to get this guy and a gun off the street, right? That's what they're trying to do. But the technical reason for the traffic stop is the seatbelt. Well, what that is called is a pretextual stop. So it's called a pretextual stop, and it is literally legal. There's a Supreme Court case on this. I think it's U.S. versus Wren, W-H-R-E-N, where the Supreme Court basically said that's legal for police officers to do. Now, in the state of New Mexico, where I retired from as a police officer, the New Mexico courts have said, no, you can't do that. So in New Mexico, my entire career, we could not do pretextual stops, but literally in every other state in the country, police officers can. And essentially what the Supreme Court said in that case, because it's the same kind of thing, police officers used a bullshit traffic violation because they really wanted to see if there were fucking drugs or guns in the car. So what the Supreme Court said is like, no. If there's a traffic violation, even like the intent of what's inside the police officer's mind, like that isn't really relevant. Or just because a police officer might be thinking, hey, this person might be drunk, this person might have a gun, this person might have drugs, just because those thoughts are running through a police officer's head doesn't mean that they can't make a traffic stop for a legal traffic stop. It can't for a legitimate reason. So basically, the Supreme Court said that any like legal reason to stop a car, police officers can go ahead and stop it, even if like in the back of their minds, they're hoping to find a drunk driver, or they're hoping to find guns. So the traffic stop, again, you may not like it, and I get it, but it's legal. So I think that's where we have to land on this. At least right now, pretextual stops are legal. Let's talk about the uniform. So I kind of mentioned that police people are saying, well, how is Dexter to know that these people were police officers? Maybe he thought that, there were like 4 random dudes who were just trying to rob him. Well, that's a pretty ridiculous thing to say for a couple reasons. And let's go and talk about those reasons. The first one is that they had on vests that said police. They also had badges, handcuffs, a handgun, a badge, and a radio. That should indicate that these people were police. They were also giving verbal commands that they were police officers. And now a couple things about this. I think I told you a few minutes ago about the neighborhood that I grew up in, Chicago. It was actually it was in the city, but a nice, safe neighborhood. Most of my neighbors were cops, firefighters, teachers, electricians, and, like regular blue-collar, normal workers who played on softball teams by whichever Irish bar happened to be up the block. Mine was Lawler's. So it's like a normal neighborhood. And even in my neighborhood, again, my mom has lived in her house on the south side of Chicago for over 50 years right now. In 50 years, the police have been called to her block one time. One time in 50 years. And again, there's not too many blocks in the entire country you can say that on. That's the kind of neighborhood this is, even though it's on the south side of the Chicago. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, even though it was a completely normal, safe neighborhood, growing up, even as a teenager, I knew that this is how Chicago police officers dress in these street tactile uniforms. They are constantly on the news in these kind of uniforms. So again, me never seeing it in real life, only seeing it on the news and in the newspaper, I knew as a teenager that sometimes this is how Chicago police dress. So the idea that Dexter Reed, who was 26 years old, who was a convicted criminal, who lived in a high crime neighborhood where these cops were literally making arrests and jumping out of their cars all the time, the idea that like he didn't know in his head, hey, maybe these are cops, like the idea is actually a pretty ridiculous thing. So Dexter Reed absolutely 100% knew that these were police officers. It's incredibly dishonest to say anything else. And also the type of vehicle. So the types of vehicle the cops were driving, yeah, they didn't look like police officers. They looked like anything else, So kind of like what I always say is, my last 4 years as a police officer, I was an investigator, so I wasn't in uniform anymore, and they gave me a Ford Fusion with a government plate. I mean, I felt like I worked for the Child Protective Service or something like that, or the IRS. Like, it didn't look like a cop car. So those are the kind of cars they drive, Nissan Altimas and Ford Fusions, and just regular normal four-door passenger cars that blend in. Only a car like this wouldn't have a government plate, but they would have lights. So these cars did have blue lights. They weren't installed on the top, but they're kind of at the top of the windshield. So the police officers did have blue flashing lights, and they actually initiated those lights during the traffic stop. And a couple things. One of the reasons why Dexter knew these were police officers is because when they came behind him with these blue lights, he stopped. All right. So again, it's silly to say that Dexter didn't know that these were police officers, but these are the kinds of things that people were saying. Now let's get to the amount of shots. So these are the kinds of things that a lot of people are also having trouble with, the amount of shots. And, I'm going to be just as transparent as I could be. I don't have an issue with the amount of shots. And the reason why I don't have an issue with the amount of shots is because it's not unreasonable. So Dexter, one person shot 11 times. Again, you wouldn't expect police officers he didn't just reach for the gun or hold the gun or possess the gun or, he was kind of waving it around like this. No, he actually used it and shot a cop. So the idea that police officers are going to go like 1 for 1 with shots, like that's not reasonable. Any police officer in a situation like this is pretty much going to fire their weapon until the threat is neutralized, until the threat is gone, until there is no more threat. Police officers fire their weapons to stop the threat. Listen, as long as in a situation like this, here's how we kind of put parameters on what the threat is. Dexter Reed, if he was in arm's length of the gun and still alive, that's a threat. That's a threat. Police officers should keep shooting until that's no longer the case, because again, he already shot a police officer. And again, I'm not that concerned with the amount of shots, as opposed to the reason for the initial shot. Here's why. So my concern about this is the reason for the shot. So if the reason for the shot is legal, lawful, objectively reasonable within policy training in the law, and that's what my main concern is. Okay. So, but once we cross that threshold and we go, yeah, of course, he shot a cop, of course police officers are going to shoot back. Anyone who says that police officers shouldn't return fire when someone's shooting at them 11 times is absolutely insane. So, yeah, we understand that police officers are going to shoot back. I think they fire their weapons for less than a minute. Again, I watched the video. I don't really have an issue with it. Now, again, if someone think of a situation where someone, has a gun, but they throw the gun, they drop the gun is 10 feet away, their arms are in the air, and they're absolutely not a danger anymore, well, yes, of course, police officers should stop firing. But again, as long as there is a legitimate threat, deadly threat, police officers should use deadly force until there is no more deadly threat. Now my opinion on this is, I think the police shooting was obviously the police shooting is legal. I think it's within policy. I don't think any of the police officers should suffer any consequences legally or administratively. I think these police officers are a hero. The officer who was shot, they got him aid really quick. And listen, the only true victim in this case is the police officer who was shot by a violent felon. That is the only victim in this case. All right, let's see what some of your contacts are. So Zigzag says, our law enforcement officers are stormtroopers. Okay, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All right, let's see. Steve says we're living in 1930s Germany. I don't know. Again, Steve, so I guess my question to Steve, and I like going back and forth with Steve, is what would you like police officers to do? So it seems like people. I'm not trying to pick on you, Steve, because I like going back and forth, and I like going back and forth with you. But what would you like police officers to do? So you don't want police officers to, stop people for nonsense and road pirates, like you say. Well, in this case, they were, trying to get like a gun off the street and a violent person who wasn't supposed to have a gun off the street, like a legitimate, like violent felon off the street. Like the idea that like you don't want cops to do that. So like, what do you want cops to do? Like I'm just curious. Ray Kelly says, does this channel support cops? Oh, that's such a good question. Here's what we support. We support honesty, and we support what the truth is, because we post body camera video all the time. You know, I want to say that our number one most watched body cam video is a case where a police officer was arrested for domestic violence on duty. We actually got the body camera footage of investigators cutting off his uniform because this guy was in handcuffs. So does that mean that we don't support police officers? No, we support good police officers, and even more than that, we support the truth. We want our viewers to know, hey, this is the reality of what's happening there on the streets between citizens and police officers. Not only is transparency from the government important, but it's fucking interesting, and we want to share that stuff with you. But yes, in general, but me, Daniel, the retired cop with a law degree, I'm just one person here, but yes, I am biased. I am biased towards people who have good intentions, and if a police officer has good intentions, they're trying to do the right thing, I'm going to be biased in favor of them. If someone has bad intentions, I'm going to be biased against them. And it's perfectly reasonable for me to say that. You know, if someone is out there committing crimes and their intention is to try to commit crimes, victimize people, and then get away and not take responsibility, I'm going to be biased against them. If police officers are sent to that call and their intention is to try to help a victim and recover property, or, you know, hold someone accountable for breaking the law, and that's the officer's intention, I'm going to be biased in favor of them. And you know what? I think that's a pretty normal human thing. I think it's weird to watch someone walk into a store with the intention to, you know, commit an armed robbery against people at a bank, and for people to say, yeah, you know, I'm kind of biased in favor of the armed robber, right? Like, that's insane. No one says that, but that's a good question. Let's see. Alabama Man says, thanks for covering the Dexter Reed case. Are you going to review the case from Whitley, Indiana? I'm not sure, Alabama Man. Can you put the name of the person in there? I don't know that off the top of my head. Let's see. Zigzag. I too am a former LEO. What I'm seeing is pure terrorism by our government. Let's see. Well, I disagree, Zigzag. I disagree, and I'm going to use some data and some facts here. So Zigzag. Here's the thing. Police officers in the United States make about 10 million arrests a year. 10 million arrests. And they are involved in approximately 1,000 fatal officer-involved shootings. Now, if you do the math on that, police officers, and also they take about 1 billion calls for service nationwide every year. So we have 10 million, because Zigzag, so what? Because context counts. Here's why. Because you could watch 2 or 3 videos on YouTube and be like, oh, all 800,000 police officers are terrible. This is 1930s Germany. And I'm going to be like, yeah, okay, those are 2 or 3 videos on YouTube. We all think they're bad. But to not put in the context of, hey, there's literally 986 million other videos where police do the right thing that you're going to pretend don't exist. Again, that's just incredibly dishonest. So let me go back to my cop math here. Okay. Again, I'm a retired cop with a law degree, not good in math, but you know, police officers make 10 million arrests a year, and they are involved in approximately 1,000 fatal officer-involved shootings. That means that literally 99.999% of the time, when police officers make arrests, there's no fatal officer-involved shooting. Again, I get that, you know, 99.999. I get that that's not enough for you. You know, I want to apologize on behalf of law enforcement in the country. We'll try to do a little bit better. But again, if there is an illegal police shooting, I'm going to go ahead and say it. We actually cover those kinds of cases all the time. All right, so let's see. Okay, we're going to go. Let's talk about. Oh God, we have an update from a terrible case. Oh, God, I really... okay, one more question. Why do you only mention fatal shootings? Cajun Randy, yeah, I mentioned fatal shootings because that's what we're covering today. I think the number of police shootings is about double that. So it could be 2,000 or 3,000. So, yeah, it is a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about instances where people actually die at the hands of police officers. But again, Randy, if I'm looking at a number like 10 million arrests, whether it's 1,000, 2,000, or 8,000, like, again, the percentage of it, like, the percentage is still well over 99.999 where that doesn't happen. So use whatever number you want, that's fine. It's not going to affect it because reality still matters. And the reality is that the vast majority of the time, over 99% of the time, like, you're not going to be shot and killed by a police officer. And I think we know that as long as you don't fight with cops, run from police, resist arrest, as long as you refrain from those things, like, your chances of being shot and killed by a police officer or harmed by a police officer are like virtually zero. It almost never happens. I can think of one case in the last couple years. I can think of two. I can think of two cases in the last couple years where people legitimately did nothing wrong and an on-duty police officer shot and killed them. So yeah, it does. And we covered those cases. And I say in all those cases, I say the police officer was wrong and the police officer should be prosecuted because that's the honest thing to say. But again, it's unbelievably rare. All right, so the next case we're going to cover is a case that I don't like talking about it, but I think everybody needs to know what the update is. So this was a case that happened here in New Mexico, Tucumcari, New Mexico. New Mexico State Police Officer Justin Hare was shot and killed by a career criminal named Jeremy Smith. So the last time we talked about this case was pretty much right after Jeremy Smith murdered Justin Hare. There is some update on this. So if you remember this case, so a little bit of background on this case. So, what happened was that we know now is Jeremy Smith was from South Carolina. He killed a paramedic named Phoenicia Machado IV. He killed her, he took her car, and he drove across the country. While he was driving across the country, it seems like he was trying to get to Albuquerque because he knew some people, he had some contacts in Albuquerque. He had some car trouble, a flat tire, about 2.5 hours or so from Albuquerque around Tucumcari, New Mexico, along I-40. He was basically out of his car trying to flag down vehicles. Thankfully, no one stopped to help Mr. Smith, but people did call into police officers. So essentially, New Mexico State Trooper Justin Hare was dispatched to help someone out change their tire. That's all he was able to do. We don't have the body camera footage yet. However, the chief of police of the state police has, basically told us what's on that body camera footage, and it's absolutely horrific. Essentially what it says is that Officer Hare is in the front seat of his car. So the FBI also talked about this in federal court and said that it's that the body camera footage is absolutely gruesome. It's absolutely horrible. It's one of those things. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to be able to handle it. But the description of it is bad enough that essentially Officer Hare pulls up on Mr. Smith because with the intention. I talked about that earlier. Intent matters. The intention to help him. Now, how do we know? How do we know that Officer Hare had a good intention? Because as he made contact with Mr. Smith, he stayed in his car. He stayed in his car. He didn't jump out of the car, approach Mr. Smith with his gun drawn, screaming and yelling. He felt comfortable enough with Mr. Smith, had the intention to just help the guy out, that Officer Hare, he stayed in the driver's seat of his car. Again, he just stayed there. Like he didn't see Mr. Smith as a threat. Again, he wasn't overbearing or anything like that. Jeremy Smith walks over to the passenger side car. And the last conversation that was relayed by the state police chief is basically the officer is offering Mr. Smith to give him a ride into town. That's the kind of guy he was. That is absolutely the kind of guy he was. He was offering to give Jeremy Smith a ride into town so he could get some help with his car. And it was at that point that Jeremy Smith pulled out a gun and, like a fucking coward, shot Officer Hare right there. He then went around to the driver's side and he shot Officer Hare again, left him for dead on the side of the highway. Mr. Smith, he somehow made it to Albuquerque. There was a call for service where a really heads-up person who works at a convenience store saw Jeremy Smith, saw him. Police officers or deputies with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, they were able to locate him. They end up in a foot chase. And during the foot chase, Jeremy Smith pulled out, he started reaching for his handgun. As he started to reach for a handgun, there was an officer involved shooting. An officer shot him in the arm. I believe we have some, you can see the footage on that. I think it's on a really, really great local news site called ABQ Raw. But I should say that, so he wasn't just reaching for the handgun. He actually grabbed the handgun and had it in his hand and then threw it kind of as the officers were shooting at him. He was hit 4 times in the arm. And the body camera footage, what I want to say about this, the main thing I want to say about this case is that what is incredible, that is just unique to policing, then it doesn't happen in any other profession. So again, Jeremy Smith, he killed a paramedic, he killed a police officer. Now he's on the run, pulling out a gun as other police officers are trying to get him into custody. Police officers shoot him in the arm, and immediately, as soon as he is shot, police officers immediately, the deputies run up to him, they search him, and they immediately start rendering aid. They put on chest seals, and they do a tourniquet. Essentially, they save his life. And you know what? If the roles were reversed, Jeremy Smith would not hesitate to murder every single cop that was on scene. And the police officers, they know that. They know that in the moment, and yet they worked hard and diligent and saved his life anyway. And that is unique to policing. That is something that no other profession does, and that's something that we don't talk about a lot. And that's why police officers, this is such an interesting and difficult job because of what police officers have to do. The life saving from these officers, again, police officers save even the fucking worst lives, and that's what they did in this case. But if you haven't had a chance, maybe we can put a link in there to the body camera video. It's absolutely incredible. So right now, so Mr. Smith, he was in the hospital for a couple days. He's now out. He's in jail here in New Mexico, and he's facing federal charges of carjacking resulting in death and discharge of a firearm during a crime. He's actually in a federal jail here in New Mexico. After he deals with his federal charges, he's going to be facing murder charges, and I'm sure a slew of other charges for the death of Officer Justin Hare. And then he also has 17 felonies he's facing in connection with the death of paramedic Phoenicia Machado IV from South Carolina. All right, let's see if we have any comments on this case. Again, I don't like talking about this case. It hits home. Kind of like I said before. It's like police officers. I think there's been. I saw the numbers. I saw the numbers the other day. I think it's been 64 police officers have been shot in the line of duty so far this year, which is absolutely that's out of control. And so it happens. It happens often. It happens too much. But when it happens close to home, it just hits. It hits closer to home. And that was the case here for me with this case, because again, the initial where Officer Hare was killed is about 2.5 hours away, and then he was apprehended about 20 minutes from my house. Let's see if we have any questions on this. So just so you know, in this case, I'm not going to read any stupid questions, all right? Let's see. Chasing Legend says, if it wasn't for cops protecting this country, it would be a real shithole. Yeah, Chasing Legends, thank you so much. I agree 100%, because we know what happens. We know what happens when there aren't police officers protecting. We have all kinds of data on this. And listen, and if you don't believe me, I've linked it a couple times before, but there's a guy named Peter Moskowitz. He's actually a professor of criminal justice over at John Jay College in New York. Peter Moskowitz on Twitter. He's like a PhD police, criminal justice researcher. He has linked all of the different studies that show what happens in real life when police officers pull back and how violent crime goes up. I mean, there's all kinds of studies. I've read a lot of them. You can read them for yourself. It's not controversial. That's the facts. Chasing Legend says, how do you prepare yourself for something that, especially when you're just trying to help someone? Oh, Chasing Legends, that's such a good question. Listen, it's really difficult. The only thing that I can say to that is, so the way that Officer Hare conducted this contact, and I've done it too, right? In the sense that let's say someone calls about who knows what, and you get there. There were a lot of times working on patrol in uniform for 15 years, like I did, where you get up to a call and whoever calls, starts walking towards you, and you just go, fuck, it's 100 degrees outside. I'm tired. I'm at the end of a 10-hour shift. And, you do what Officer Hare did. You just sit in your car and you let the other person come and talk to you kind of through the window. Like that literally happens for almost every police officer, every shift, especially if there isn't if it's not a traffic stop, if it's not you're the suspect of a crime. If you're just a normal person, most of the time, yeah, I'd let someone do that. Now, if the person looked weird or shady or they were armed, well, yeah, of course, then you hop out and you talk to them like that, because you're at a severe disadvantage sitting in your car. So the only thing I could say is that, even in situations where you don't think you're in danger, situations like that, get out of the car. Don't stay in your car. And again, that just shows that Officer Hare saw Mr. Smith as someone that he wanted to help, So It's really it's really difficult, and yeah, I mean, it just shows that even a shark could kill you in New Mexico. It's a difficult thing. So there's always danger. There's always danger doing this kind of stuff, even with people who you don't think might want to harm you, or you're there, like, again, you're literally just there to help someone change a tire. All police officers have done that. That's a really good question, and here's the thing. I've said this before, Chasing Legends, that if someone has the intent and they say, you know what, I'm going to talk about intent a lot. I think it's important. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kill the next police officer I see. Whether as a police officer, you can't be in code red all the time. You can't pull up to every single time you're driving around for 10 hours. Every time you come to a red light, you can't pull out your gun and looking around all crazy. Like there's no way to survive doing that, right? So it's one of those things where if someone says, I have the intent, I'm going to kill the next police officer, there's almost nothing that a police officer can do. You're always going to be reacting to something that someone does to you. It's the same thing on a traffic stop. Now, in a traffic stop, you could be in a situation where, okay, like I'm approaching a car, I don't know who this person is. Like, you can be a little more aware. And again, they're in the car, you're standing up, you have a little bit of an advantage. But again, if someone says, hey, I'm going to shoot this cop when he's 5 feet away, there's nothing you could do, because I promise you, rounds are going to be coming at you before you can draw out and fire back. And yeah, it's a difficult thing, but something all police officers, basically have to make peace with. That this is the kind of thing that could happen while they're just trying to help people, like Officer Hare. Okay. Any other questions on this? Let's see. Joe Cool says, all right. No other questions. No other questions on this case. Yeah. Okay. No, we're going to go to this next case. So this next case, this next case hasn't made national news yet, but I'm covering it because I'm one of the first ones to cover it. I think I put up a story on Twitter and on Instagram and Instagram and TikTok about this case. So I have a pretty good network that I know of people who live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm not from there. I never worked there, but I got real involved and still am with the Christopher Schur case. So Christopher Schur is a police officer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who is facing charges. It's probably one of the most unjustified cases of a police officer facing charges. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's a real miscarriage of justice. So that case happened in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I got pretty involved with a lot of people who are advocates for Officer Chris Schur. So whenever something happens in Michigan, these same people kind of follow all these things. So 2 days ago, that was actually yesterday. So yesterday morning, I was alerted by some of these people out in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that there was an incident where someone died in police custody, and within a couple hours of this person dying in police custody, that there were already protests. And again, so they gave me where the location happened. They gave me the name of the person who died. And a Google search 100 different ways, I literally couldn't find any information about it, except that they were able to share a Facebook page with me of someone who was organizing a protest over this case. So again, that was yesterday morning where I started covering it, and they're trying to get Ben Crump involved. So let me just tell you what happened. So this happened in Kentwood, Michigan. There's an individual named Samuel Sterling. His middle name is Dejan, and apparently that's what he likes to go by. So Samuel Dejan Sterling is an individual who had felony warrants. Police officers were trying to make an arrest for these felony warrants, which is, again, a reasonable thing for police officers to do. Again, like if you don't want police officers to try to arrest people who have felony warrants, then what do you want the cops to do? And let me just explain really quick about, how you get to be, the status of someone who has a felony warrant. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to commit a felony, right? You have to commit a felony, and then a judge has to say that there's actually probable cause that you did it. Not that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but a judge has to look at the evidence and agree, hey, there's probable cause that you committed this felony. So now you're in the court system, and then you have to miss a court date. So you have this court date in front of this judge, and I know all the people watching this, could you imagine having a court date for a felony and just saying, you know what, I'm not going. I don't take this shit seriously. Like, again, that's pretty awful. That's the kind of person we're dealing with. So you commit a felony, a judge says there's probable cause that you committed it, and then you don't go to court. So that's the kind of person we're dealing with. So again, if you don't want police officers to, try to, and the remedy for that is, a judge issues a warrant and they tell police officers, hey, Go find people who have warrants, bring them to us. So again, if you don't want police officers to go after people who have felony warrants, I'm not sure what you want police officers to do, but my guess is that if you or your family were the victim of someone who committed a felony against your daughter, you would want one of the few things you would want police officers to do is to get those people so they can go back into court. Anyways, so this guy Dijon had a felony warrant. Police officers tried to arrest him, and instead of cooperating, he like a reasonable human would, he decides he's going to resist arrest and run from police officers. There is a chase, and somehow during the chase, an unmarked police car smashes into Dijon, or he runs in front of the police car, and he basically gets pinned to a Burger King. And he does die from his injuries. And listen, that's all we know. So a couple things. We don't have any video of what happened. We don't have any witnesses. And I mean, I guess that's one way to have it your way. But we don't have any video of what happened. We don't have any witnesses saying what happened, and we don't have any official comment from the police giving their side of what happened. That we literally have no information besides what I just said. And again, we have no other information on what we just said. Despite that, there were protests the night that this happened, and here's what these protesters wanted. They were saying that the police officers murdered Dijon, and they were saying that they wanted the killer cops to be in jail. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if police officers did the right thing or the wrong thing. I don't know if police officers followed policy or if they followed the law. Maybe they broke policy. Maybe they broke the law. I don't have any idea. And you know what? It's okay to say that. It's okay to have a situation like this and to not jump to conclusions. But here's how you know that these anti-police activists are incredibly dishonest, because just because a black guy is killed by police officers, they literally have no information about it, and they're calling it murder and saying that they want the cops in jail with no facts. So I guess my point is that no matter what the facts are, maybe it's a Dexter Reed who's shooting at police officers, and it doesn't matter what the facts are, they're going to say that it's not justified either way. And that's the problem. It's not that you criticize police, it's that the criticism is dishonest. If you think police officers did something wrong, that's fine. Let's talk about it. Say, hey, police officers, they broke this policy. They broke this law. Police officers had this training, and they didn't do it. They did that instead. That is honest criticism, and that's where we can have a good discussion. Anytime someone dies by police officers saying that all the police officers are bad or racist, again, it's not honest, and more importantly, it's not interesting. So I'm going to end this by saying I don't know what happened in this case. But what I do know is that honest people, they wait until the evidence is in before they make a call or before they have an opinion on a case. All right, we're going to read a couple more comments on this. And this case is one I'm going to be following in Kentwood, Michigan, because especially if Ben Crump is involved, I do expect it to blow up. All right, let's see. Okay, now I will read maybe some silly comments here. Steve says, I've lived in a few places with little to no law enforcement, and I felt more safe because you can lose your life over a burned out light bulb in the land of freedom. Okay, all right, Steve. So let's talk about this. So I get it, but again, Steve, it's a little dishonest. And I know you don't want to be a dishonest guy. Here's why. So let's go to the south side of Chicago, Steve. So in Chicago, all right, in Chicago, there were about 300 murders last year. How many of those do you think were like illegal murders by police officers? So I'm just saying, like, what percent? So there would have to be 3 illegal police shootings in Chicago in order for it to be 1% of the problem. So again, that's why it's just so dishonest. Now we can all say that yes, we want police officers to follow the law. We all agree there, but to pretend that like you're at more risk of being shot and killed by a police officer for no reason than a gangbanger in Chicago, again, it's just factually not true. 300 murders in Chicago, and again, there would have to be 3 illegal police shootings in order for it to be 1% of the problem. Not 20% of the problem or 90% of the problem, for 1% of the problem. And I can tell you there were not 3 illegal police shootings last year. There weren't. I know that because the liberal mayor who doesn't really like the police officers and the DA Kim Fox, who is not a fan of police officers in Chicago. Again, she, isn't, if there's anything even controversial, she'll go ahead and charge a cop, and there weren't. Let's see. Steve says, South side of Chicago is a cakewalk compared to Nuevo, New Mexico. I guess, Steve, but, just so you know, Forbes magazine actually just did a study on this, and they said that New Mexico per capita is the most violent state. So, yes, I've lived in both places. I would rather walk around bad neighborhoods in Albuquerque before I walked around bad neighborhoods of Chicago. Like I said, he said Mexico. Sorry, Chasing Legends. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's they're all violent, and again, it's like pretending that police. And a lot of times in Mexico, the cartels actually control crime. But it's like pretending that police are like this huge part of the problem. I mean, again, it's just factually not true. And that's where I think we should stay. Again, let's call out bad shootings. I'm good with it. Let's call out bad police shootings. But again, pretending that that's like the biggest problem. Again, Memphis, Tennessee had Memphis, Tennessee had 450 murders. Again, like the police are not the problem in places like that. Let's see, Pin King. All right, hey, thank you so much, Pin King, for that. Says there's a website that tracks that info in Chicago. Absolutely, yeah. There's a couple that I know that tracks murders in Chicago. I can't remember exactly what they are, but thank you so much for the donation. We appreciate it. That's really kind of you, Pin King 554. Thank you so much. All right, so that's going to, let's see, I'm going to read one more comment, and that's going to be, let's see, I agree. Get the facts before making a decision, even if doing your own research needs to be okay, by finding as many sources as possible and facts over feelings. Autistic Shills, thank you so much. And yeah, you know what? So kind of where I am, Mr. Shill, kind of where I am on this is like, if you don't know, ask questions. Like, that's perfectly legitimate. Like, I don't expect everybody to sit down and research every single officer involved shooting and, spend a whole lot of time doing this. Don't do that, Just have some information, then come and watch our channel for the rest of it, right? But it's like what I expect if you don't, Alabama Man, thank you so much. If you don't know, ask questions. Like I said, I don't know a lot about what happened in this shooting in Michigan. I don't know, so I'm asking questions. Like I asked a couple on the show, hey, here's what I want to know, because I don't know, so it would be weird for me to have like a big, strong, huge opinion on this Kentwood, Michigan case without knowing any of the facts. All right, that's going to be the show. I want to say thank you so much. And listen, thank you for the questions and comments. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And throughout the week, if you leave comments, I do go through them throughout the week, and I love to go back and forth with people. Please subscribe to the channel, share it with friends and family. Again, my name is Daniel. You can follow me over at Police Law News. And again, just so you know, like I said earlier, I will be on the Chris Boyle over on the OAN network. I did about a 15-minute segment. We recorded it earlier, so you can go ahead and watch me on that show earlier today. I would appreciate the support. Oh, Mr. Abe, thank you so much for the donation. That's really kind of you. Really appreciate it. Your contributions today were incredible, and thank you so much for the support. It is really, really appreciated. All right, well that's going to be our show today. We'll see you guys next week. I hope everyone has a great and safe weekend. Thank you.